maybe on the camera, maybe you cannot see it. Here, some Sangha member already made these.
Don't lose your own
Don't
ground.
lose your own ground.
Mhm.
Don't disturb others' mind. That's very cute. Oh yeah, teni nga tsu zuk tongpa o jiba te tepsha kiyore. Teni ta zuk zaya te ang korang ke gyotang jenla teni shiong yi zuk chik mak toko ma korang geme lip shiongwa chik kyang yo mare. Teni korang ke gyo main pali gyo kyan jamba chik lip shiongwa yang yo mare. Tepsha na korang ke gyo kona lip shiongwa gyotang jen kona lip shiongwa tere. O ter tawa chik la chak yore. Tepsha na ne ko kang la tuhu yore zena nam riwu te korang ke gyurkin la tuhu yore. korang ke gyotang ken te tso yen na yang korang ke gyurkin la yang tuhu yore. Tepsha na tamche ni tamche to panchun gyurkin ki go ni martu na kunzub tarni ta yang trip tabu yo mare. Garde gyurkin temre la tu tsarni zon te teni ko rangwang go ni tripa tang korang ko ngou go ni trip tabu ya med ni zhan ki chuma tang zhan ki zu songwi na ngoni psha na zimman da wore. Khoi na melong na ka zungyen tawo. Malam tawo. Tep shen tu chinang ka dak zuk tawo. O te tawo chi go go khi yore. Ngi changan rok. Nga lo chung chung ka kap la lo chubden chor git. Parche yin gire. Nga lo chung chung kap la nga zo sob gyong mang po yo mare. Ti kap la chu de xar kaya tar khi yo pi kap re. Shet cha tang gyang sa teni mang po yo mare. Yena nga zo tang ma chik la tok tang po Heart Sutra chik. Ndi Heart Sutra korong mara ta ndi nang ka tong nip jib jor te zhong chik nang la nang ni lama chik song song. Nga ti nang la yo. Teni ku kar se song se ngi ta tong trang kendo. Gawa chu chen se ka shi song. Teni kyo tong pa ni yen te se song. Tem zir yin bi shir se song. Hoi na chinang ka dak zu ku shen se ka shi song. Ti ngon lang i te kom yung me di philosophy da wo. Nga hang sa song. Cha chang ko ma song da. Yin na ma tse kang i je ya me pa chi ngi sem na la shiong song. Kap te la. Teni jima kale vyang ni teni tondak te tso hako yan ra wo chik shiong song. Yin na tok tangbo te ngi yang de kom yung se lo nga tene jir ka kap la. O didi re.
So we're continuing to explore this topic with the first statement of these 4 lines of the 4 applications of emptiness. And it says, form is empty. And so forms occur in dependence upon and in relation to their own specific set of causes and conditions. Forms cannot occur in the absence of causes, nor can forms occur due to causes and conditions that are not their cause and condition. And so only when it is the form's specific cause and set of conditions, then in dependence upon and in relation to that, does it occur? Does it manifest or appear? Therefore, it is dependent upon those factors. It is a result dependent upon causes and conditions. And then those causes and conditions, moreover, are also dependent on their causes and conditions. Dependent. They're mutually dependent, mutually defining. And only in that dependent relationship can there be the relative appearance of that thing, but that thing does not exist in its own right without that reliance, without that relationship and dependency. It is not autonomous. Does not exist by its nature. It is fabricated or created only due to other causes and conditions, only in relation to other causes and conditions. And so it's merely appearing like reflections on a mirror, like dreams, like the reflection of the moon on water. This reminds me, Rinpoche said, when I was just 17 or 18 years old, and the first time I studied or encountered these kinds of teachings, and at that time in Tibet, the Dharma was just again starting. It hadn't yet been fully reestablished, and so there weren't shedras, there weren't formal places to study, and opportunities were kind of rare and sort of short and so forth, not as extensive or available as they are now. And so I do remember at one point there was a Lama who was teaching, not on the Heart Sutra text as a whole, but he gave a teaching on the 4 applications of emptiness. And I very clearly remember his exact words, and he said, the subject is a pillar. The pillar is empty. Why? Because it is dependently occurring. For example, like the moon's reflection on water. And Rinpoche said, I just remember like being in a state of awe or like shock, because I had never studied philosophy before to any great degree. I didn't know any philosophy. And it wasn't that I fully comprehended what he said at that moment, but it struck me. And my entire life, I will always remember that moment. And that first time I heard those teachings, I liked it. I thought, I want to study this a lot. I want to learn about this.
Wow,
Wow.
Teni tedipshini temdir ke when nga chu lupon de lam sona yang temdir te shokchigni tangbo ni kyang di lupo de ye ni trip yong kan chi ngo go ni tarta ngarang chola yo pa nam jin korang trip yong kan chi mare tok tangbo phami teni jirken la teni ore devjin to kyo ar ngum li la yang teni ore devjin to teni chendi to ko khala tang sor kyong she bi jirken cha chama de la sor kyong she bi jirken cha chang la tenim sarlong shong ni data de ri chik chega ore tamche temre lip shong ware korang divshana rawang go ni to pa ngo go ni to pa ndawo chi temre krik pi go ni ha ko thok khe ore tendipshini nga chu ha ko go yore tana kerang chu dere tani ta testa tu samlo tang na dekhen du chik samlo tang dere teni huena metok tela ne temrir kirpa ngip ko charso tarong tela ne deze chik tarong ti chinga cho dona ne huena metok deina korang metok ndi rakpa den tip chik nga cho na na jin trip yo mar zerik bi shanna 강거 고니 샤고 쿠요레 제나네 teni korang teni nga chu chahi takpi 차히 딱 비릭바 세지 요래 매도 코랑 차젠데 되니 차히 딱 비릭바 세지 요래 디고니 삼로 땅나 다 매도 가수 내라 접둑둑둑 코랑 가수 박식 요래랑 우랑 그 저월에 삼고 요래 옛날 때니 가수 차히만 보리 저월에 코랑 차히만 보리 접래 회나 로마만 보 냠티오니 저월에 로마 리리니 매도 어레제는 말해 옛날에 로마만 보면 직도 속니 야끼요 빨라 매독색 요래 가지고 옛날 가지고 덴접 좀 그요래 옛날 접요 땅에 샷요나 자기 레레니니 경 매독 말해 오나 로마 랍삼로 땅라 로마 직대양 코랑양 로마 제니 가지고 덴접다고 요래 오레 로마 레 I'm so worried this is 로마 제니 덴접 벨 가지고 덴접 전부 증그 요래 옛날양 로마 코랑라양 코랑라 차만 보여래. 코랑 찍그 톡라 슉 차만 보여래. 슉 레레니 로마 아래 말해. 코랑 차갸 탐밥 주비잖아. 차갸 탐밥 주비잖아 로마 말해. 노 찍그 나라 차갸 탐밥 주니 비잖아 로마 말해 와. 다 로마만 보고 차기 로요래. 마tom 로민 점바 메송 안가죠. 다오 메토콘 점바 메송 데니 로민 점바 메송. 다 로미티 차히 총총 때저양 코랑랑 소소 마음 차와님 차와 뜻니도나 레리리리니 그 ngamin 점바 메니 심합시만 전용 그래 덴디지니 소나 타마 경수 경차로레 섭다나니 든튼 참에 거와서 놓아요 든 차럽 거와 데리 총메 바거와 총타 거와 다 오나 총타도 요르베지나 드tip지기 예니 코랑 흥안이 따와도 덴버 잡용 간지 요거레제나 나빌루라 대요 말 가레지나 총총 지기오나 콜라 차치기 오피 딱래 콜라 찹살이야 요나 코 다동더니 총으로 놓아요 피 딱래 덴디시니 쌀소나 강섬 지글라 타미 타말라 다 차직사나 코 메토레 남카 똥아 따르도 메토레 디입시나네 딘디입시니 딱나양 아주 하고 요레스 메토 가완두자 로마 가완두자 데스타투자니 소나 하고 요레스
So, if we take our body as an example, then the body wasn't always like, if we're going to say it exists by its own nature. It is what it is without relation to other factors. It's timelessly or always that. But our body is not always this. It's constantly independent upon or in relation to other factors that we're looking at this body. So, for example, that dependence like upon our parents, the initial union of our mother and father, independence upon and in relations to those conditions. Likewise, the compelling force of being independence upon our previous karma, our previous lives' actions, and so forth. And then all the factors that were necessary, all the causes and conditions, the food, the nourishment, and so forth that enabled our body to grow in the womb and then eventually develop and change in independence upon and in relation to one factor after another. Slowly then it developed and then eventuated into what we have now, but this that is occurring, our body, is only in relation to or independence upon other factors. It isn't that in its own, autonomously, by its own right, through its own existence. And that's what we understand through the logic or the reasoning of dependent origination. And so that's one way in which we begin to understand dependency and how it means that things don't ultimately have an existence, an inherent identity as being exactly what we perceive them to be in any given moment. Another perspective, as we continue to examine phenomena and their dependent origination and their nature, we go further, for instance, looking at coarse forms, like if you take the idea of a flower, we have the concept of a flower, but when we investigate, we can't actually find a single object that in and of itself is ultimately a flower. So when we search for a flower, we see there's a leaf. That's not the flower. There's the stem. That's not the flower. And we go through this process. Each part is not the flower. So the flower has parts. And when we investigate, each of those parts are not the flower, but there isn't a flower that is other than those. So there isn't actually a flower. But we have the habit to perceive and relate to that sort of assembly of many parts, and then we think there is a flower. The flaw is that we believe that the flower is a singularly existent thing established by its own nature that actually exists as a thing. But when we look for it, we can't find it. All we can find is other things, like a leaf. So the leaf is not a flower. And then if you look at, now we have a new concept. We're no longer conceiving of or grasping to the concept of a flower. Now we're grasping to the concept of a leaf. And we think, there is a leaf. I swear this is a leaf. I promise you it's a leaf. But now you start to look at the parts of the leaf. I don't have terms for parts of the leaf, but I'm sure there are terms for parts of the leaf. But you start to take all those different parts, and with each part, it has its own. We have our own concept about what that part is. The leaf is not that part. There isn't a leaf other than those parts that we can find that exists as being a leaf. All we can find is 1,000 different parts, and as soon as we're focused on the part, that we don't have the concept of a leaf, now we have the focus of whatever that part is.
leaves 말해.
So the parts of the leaf are not the leaf.
Then daily leaves.
There isn't a leaf that is other than those parts. So from the very beginning, there never was a leaf. So as we go through that process, first we see there isn't a thing that is itself a flower, and then there isn't a thing that is itself exists as being a leaf. And then we take those parts and we can continue to dissect part to part. And you have this in Western science as well. It's like you have all the parts and their names and so forth until you can't divide further, until you get to a point we could say of almost like there being an indivisible particle, like it's so small you can't go further. But the problem is if you're going to say that there is a final particle that exists, even that can't be established, because if a particle then exists as a building block together with other particles for greater parts, then that smallest particle has parts. Once we say there is a particle, immediately there has to be parts. It's impossible that there aren't parts. And so as we keep going in that investigation, eventually we arrive essentially at space. There isn't any one thing that exists there that we can ultimately identify and say this exists. So along the entire way, all we can say is we have concepts of that we impute upon it, but that can't actually be established to exist as being it. So look for the flower, the thing that is the flower itself. Look for the thing that is the leaf itself. That's all.
So then Tandi metokte kesa imjongkong yo mar. 코 당보 내라 요드니 대니 평송 당보 덴트직 요드네 대니 가춘 통산데 랩송 제사가 종공 요 말. 매또 그 유당 깽 사원 깽 토라 매또 문도 와레리 토니 유 토라 문도 깽 토라 문도 당보 평사메레
Deeper to Lama.
no
Okay.
대니 와르도 니사요 말. 가르치는 디 땜질 그릇 바탕 따땅이 딱 송아 코랑 따따 때닌데 님큰 만들에다 님큰 색을 니상 님큰 색 직경 요 말매 동을 따다 말지 가춘 드립시니 딱나세 그요다 가르치는 따다 던튼 참익 그 바탕 아주 시송 참익 지메트로 송아 디바르도 시나 매독 니상 님큰 가완도 당호 숑사 숑큰 요 말에세 그렇다 뜻에 그렇다 당호 숑사 대양 요 말, 숑큰 요 말. 와또 니사양 요 말, 님큰 요 말. 타마 메독도 메송나 로사양 요 말은 롬큰 메독 요 말. 또 어나 다 가르지나. 다께 응거 닉섬당 트라바레. 디망라 emptiness 제기요. 옛나양 걔랑 하고 바지라. 너 니가수 샷비 릭바티 망라 히럽티 망라. 돈듬 쇼피 릭바 제기요. 니룩 딱상 셰피기 히럽레. 디ngola 텐디치니 요 말에제 ngu니 ngupu niluk tendire제 단라 팝게 요레다. 당아주 하고 그래. 마톡거마 나주 실당 그 소수 깨우 히바뚝 메크 히바니 존테 이키 히비와트 히바뚝 그 김버 그 ngola 나주 나탕ngola 너 잠식 너 해요래. 그래. 대가서 가게요래. 야 메똥델란도 덴델란도 또 군줍기 히바레. 또 군줍기 히바레. 나주 강 히바 나주 강 통화대 참만 탈툭바 에레제는 말해. 디탁제 송화 탐쳇때 영어 탁바직 체크요 무부 니룩동 탕요 에레제는 요 말. 어디리레스?
So when we look at the whole sort of appearance of a flower, first, there isn't some place that a flower, like a flower that exists exactly as it is, that it was before, and then now it came here. So there's no point of origin of a flower. The flower didn't exist in the seed. We didn't see it there. And it didn't exist in the conditions. We don't see it there if we investigate. And so there wasn't a place from which it originated nor a flower that came from there. Then in the middle, as we're examining it, there isn't a flower that is there, that has a duration, that a thing that is a flower, nor a place where the flower
where is abiding?
There's not a place where the flower is abiding, nor a flower that abides there. I'm going to think about better terms for that. And then in the end, so for example, when we examine, then, where is the flower? Is there a place where there is a flower? We look at parts and smaller particles, and we keep going until we get to then the smallest particle that we could possibly sort of begin to divide indivisible, and then keep going, and there isn't actually a place there where there is a flower or a flower that abides. And then in the end, when it disappears, there isn't a place that it goes to nor a flower that goes there. So it is devoid of origin, duration, and cessation. And as we begin to understand that, then we begin to understand emptiness. It's empty of those factors. This is from the perspective of wisdom that is investigating what is actually the case, what is the ultimate case that is actually ultimately true. When wisdom investigates the natural state, the actual nature of things, using logic of the ultimate nature, then there is no actual thing that can be established to have inherent truth whatsoever, and it determines that. At the same time, relatively, we still have the experience of the appearance of these phenomena. We still have our 6 consciousnesses, and from visual consciousness all the way up to mental consciousness. And there's the mere appearance of the objects to those perceptions. There is no problem with the fact that it doesn't have that inherent identity or existence, and yet it still appears. Here's a flower. It is very nice. That is appearing to our relative, what we call that as relative reality or relative perception. But it does not hold up to ultimate valid cognition, like the ultimate reasoning of the way things are. Because ultimately, its existence or imputed truth of being whatever we've conceived of it to be cannot be established, does not accord with the natural state or the way things are. 맞아?
오야 때배 가침보지 그랬다 결혼수 하 내가 수도 삼 그랬더니 뜨그 말에 내가 죽다트로 럭샤 차상하는 거 통고도 되게 나와 잠식 만둑 제게요 말에 졸라 나와 따르도 덴트비오 메테제기요 예니 트비오 그 나춘 좀 반나면 누게 제기요 뜻단라 밥고라와 나와 잠식 나추 타르니 그 희방은 남기 ngola 타르니 그 참미 ngola 접고요 나 그담 통교래 메그 중 통교래 대소 거랑 서바메 빠리 거랑 요기요래 참마 띵올라 옛나양 히럽 잠모 돈돔 쇼시 그릭빙올라 디크샷 요나네 접크요 말 땡아 투소수 겨남기 삼로 땅고요 말와 임버 요버 집식신이 삼로 땅도 거래 차창 접요밥 덴트 임바 집식신 삼로 땅요래 어 디프샤나 덴디 신이네 참마니까 카카피에 고래 마토 꼬마 걔랑서 샘트로 와다고 용거래 땡이 쬐쬐 땅니 딥셔나 돈동 쇼시 기릭 빙어 락샤나 돈 담발라 저비오 마레 삼거래 다른짓 그 참밍어라 너가 잠지기 요래제래 다른짓 참밍어라 덴트지기 요카니 그 말에 옛날 똑비 딱 해요래 덴트 가진 아주 워치 그랬다 건 너나 덴트 다워지 그런 후고 종 용거래 디마르 파티오 비겸선지 회나 디참마니까 간에다오래 제나는 이 걔랑서 회 지금 회다 총총 지구장나 걔랑서 아메리카라 착설이 경크르제 지요와 회나 때 남신데 돈동 쇼시 기릭 받아오래 회나 간에다오래 제나 디 착설이 가수 디 가와라 파타나 던튼 망보 임반 통고요 말 가수 믿고 거소 척보다 살레트다 드디 막도 고모 코다가직 든튼 종종만 보냠 뜻도 요바징 통고요 말 옛날에 착설 멜로나라 찍답잖아 그럼 든튼 종종 짱짱 막도 고마 요말 와르참체 똥바 임바징 통도 거래 공수 회나 돈동 쇼시 그렇게 비트리 다운 통고요 어떤 일이에요?
This is a very kind of important point because we might wonder like, well, how does that work? Because I'm seeing forms, sounds, tastes, scents, and tactile sensations. But this is not denying the experience of those, that mere appearance of those. It's just saying that appearances don't exist as they appear, that they don't have inherent truth or validity as being exactly that, by their very nature, like that they've always been that and they exist as being that according to the way that we conceive of them and relate to them. And so our relative kind of valid cognition, our relative perception is that they appear and we experience that, and they appear, due to certain factors and so forth. But ultimately, from the perspective of profound wisdom, using logic that examines the absolute nature, they cannot be established to exist in the way that we conceive of them. Most ordinary people don't think about these things. They just take as the very basis of their experience the assumption of the existence of appearances. That whatever appears to their perception exists as being that, is inherently and truly that. And then when we come to teachings on ultimate reality, people most often get confused because they mix up what is relatively valid versus what is ultimately true. And that we can't mix them up. The logic examining the absolute nature of phenomena is looking at its ultimate nature of what is actually the case. It's not denying their relative appearance, our mere experience of them. The problem is that upon the experience of them, we have a concept of what they are, and we assume they exist as being that in their own right, and that's because of our habits. And so whatever appears, we impute an inherent truth or an existence, an identity to that as being whatever we conceive of it to be. We think that it exists as being our concept of it. And that's the problem. That's the non-recognition, the ignorance. An analogy, merely for the sake of analogy, of looking at the difference between the logic or reasoning that establishes what the ultimate nature is versus the relative appearances and our experience of things would be like, in our experience, one way that we could use an analogy for that would be like if we had a really powerful microscope. So let's say that what's seen in the microscope is analogous to the reasoning of the logic that establishes what is ultimately true. And then you have what you can perceive with your eyes, what you can see visually. So that's analogous to relative reality. So take, for example, this pillar. We can see this pillar, and we think of this pillar as being strong and solid. It's one big object. We are not seeing every single particle that composes that pillar. We're seeing one singular solid object. But if you put that, so that would be analogous to a relative reality. And then if you put that under the microscope, then what you see is not one big pillar, but numberless tiny or tinier, depending on the kind of microscope, smaller particles, and maybe even space around those particles, and so on and so forth. The microscope doesn't deny the appearance of the pillar. And so similarly, phenomena appear to our relative perception as mere appearances. But when we investigate them using reasoning of the ultimate nature, then we see what their actual or natural state is. Melissa?
오야 때니 당아주 소수 개원남기 강통화당 강히히요바당 아주 강탁잡히요바 아주 히바tuk 유르득기르비 유르탐첼라 아주 로그 탁초직시히요로와 느리레 삼야 차창마데 데니 땡아주 랑랑 소수 아주 디 유르데 데타우 임빙이 바요 말에 회나 머치그 아주 머남김 통수를 거랑 카카코코레와 회나 머치그 아주 잠불랑 그 강라 먹죽이 포첸데 제 요르와 옛날 때니 gerka mambu nang la teni kerang ke teni ti konsu tar tang la tzug yak puta la yo mare yang gerka mambu nang la tzug pa yak po reze kyo re gari zeng nga chu topi ter tar to khaki ke zug yak po mar ze tak yo re khaki ke reze drop tak yo re gang re teni don ki thola kar re
Mhm.
옛날 topi ter tar to vjek ni nga chu teni re mo ma po thon chor mandawa mo ma po nang chor mandawa mo ma po tela nzentang mandawa teni re wa cha tsama ta teni re topi mo ma po chi ke yimbar thak pya do na mo ma po chi ke membar thak cha khyo re khon chu nguni tere sam khyo re rang rang so su sam lo nam je rep sam khyo re ta so su ke u thak cha so na chik ta chik da wo chi mdu ga nguni tong ko tholan de re ya chi mlo wa chi mdu ga ta kar de na topi drop ta khyo re 타낙 죽직라 따거나 나초 머남기 통소리 양 가가지 해요. 머남기 통소리 땅 던조 남기 통소리 양 나가 말. 회나 샤땅 시오라 소파 치크 미규르 라 강낭 효파 탐친다고 나추 몰라 나가마도. 가레지나 왁책 거고 나땅 가가리. 디셴남 노르나 대니 나추 소수 개워 남기 초롱고 히바. 가성이 this side 랍소아 서로 통이 히바. 돈 담비 닐금 통화 마임 파티 서로 돈 통이 히바 때 중고라. 강 나와 탐체 때 타타마타리. What?
Kangno tamche tatatare.
Yeah, 타타마타 지그레 라비.
What does that mean? Tatamata.
타타마타 I don't know.
Okay.
타타마타레제나 남바 나츠파레.
Okay.
타타제나 colorfied.
Yeah.
드제근도 왜?
Not quite.
colorful.
Not quite. But it's okay.
드제나 크라텐 칼로칼리빠만 보여로 왔다. 리타타.
Just mindrawa.
드디 징통도 그 요레스.
So essentially, what we perceive doesn't actually exist in the object. The object doesn't actually exist ultimately as being that. And one straightforward example of that is that as ordinary beings, we don't all, the object is not what determines how we perceive it. So what we see, what we know about it, what we determine about it, what we decide about the 6 objects of our consciousnesses, it's like this, it's like that, and so forth, doesn't mean the object actually exists as being that. And so because the object doesn't actually ultimately exist according to our perceptions, then we can all see one object differently and have different evaluations of it. For example, what one culture might consider beautiful, and they would say, oh, such a beautiful form, this person could, win a beauty pageant. But then there might be lots of other cultures, different countries of people who are like, oh, definitely not. And so one way of thinking, one conceptual imputation on that form is that it's beautiful according to a certain group of people, and from the perspective of other people, their concept of it is not that. So which one is true? So what we can see is that we impute a reality upon our perceptions that doesn't actually exist in the objects. They aren't ultimately one thing that everyone perceives the same. We all perceive things differently. We experience things differently. We conceive of things differently. And that's because they don't exist according to our concepts of them. the object isn't actually that. And thereby, everyone can have a different experience of it. So that one group of people or one individual is saying it's this, and another is saying it's that. So what ordinary mind, conceptual mind, determines about an object doesn't actually exist in the object. It's merely our conceptual imputation upon that object, upon perception. If it ultimately existed as that, we would all have to agree and experience the same thing, but we don't. And even when we look at, like, for example, our visual consciousness, what one person is seeing is not necessarily what another person is seeing. We don't know what someone else is actually seeing. And then when you go to different species, for example, we could have one material object, but then that, even human beings don't agree upon, but then you have like other species like birds and so forth. What are they seeing and what are they experiencing? What is arising to their perception is not the same as ours. Again, because perception is based on habituation of the mind, not based on not determined by the object. And so whatever our different habitual perceptions are, which contribute to our different species and so on and so forth, then is going to look differently to each of us. And so as ordinary beings, then our own sort of personal perception over here is not what actually exists over there. Like we were speaking about yesterday on this side, we have all of the appearances and perceptions of our relative reality. And those appear in a wide range, in a multitude of colors, you could say, to different beings. And so then the things that we attribute to, the concepts that we have about the objects don't actually ultimately exist in the object, nor are they determined by that. They're determined by our mind. Also.
Okay, so tendire tivshirna teni zugta dembert payo marazere ton tambala ramjin ki tomba ni te zekyore. Zug tomba o jipitonte tere.
So therefore,
re teni tomba o jipat titonde. Teni tandi kare kogo yore zenana ngatu made yamakas. Mulaway in English. Made yamakas oma zete takpi mar yopap dentip kim thayang malong kwanchik. Mepa kayang mepin thalayang malong pachik gogore. Team thagni ti charwi ramjin chanchik la nguni tongni te tedichik gogore. Team sherna ndi zug tomba o jibi tambo tomba tan la papa ti kare kam thasir kyore zena yopa thamche takpin thalal hongyo mares dentup kam thalal hongyo mares dentup kam thade kakore seriore zekore dentup kam thaseriore tangu bonam ki niluk ngoni tedi reser dentup kam thate serdi ta korang kare jena korang ka niluk ton tambala rikpi shet yona korang ka chunit matup pares ngoni tambo ni tedi re ta korang shirtang tedi re ngubo nang charni zorte ngubo korang ka niluk tedi re ma tokoma tanda nga chu rikpa ka chik top ter ki rikpa tang chahi tak pi rikpa sokla penni ko mepr zogyo marta ko mepr map zu rikpi makshet da yang te ramjin ki korang tedi re kar sang lab yana when me tok de nga chum den tela tsawa ni mepr zobje gona chik me songwi me pa yana me tok de me la tya la zop pa shi ka keyo marwa teni nga chu me tok me song ze kyo ten rawo mare me to kang she gugu du tata ni ke korang ramjin ton tambala tedi re ta kha ko gugu yore di hirip zati te ngoto yore tedi re ze ni tedi re
So forms cannot be established to be inherently or truly existing. According to the ultimate perspective, their natural state is empty by their very nature. And what we should understand in that, when we look at this wisdom, this approach that we're looking at is called Madhyamaka in Sanskrit, the middle way in English. And that it doesn't mean non-existence, like where we refute existence and now we establish non-existence. But rather than we don't fall to the extreme of establishing existence as being existent or as being the ultimate final proof way, and then we also don't fall into the extreme as establishing that non-existence is the ultimate nature. So it's not existent nor non-existent. Its nature does not fall into either of these two extremes. That's true emptiness. So as we're going through this process of these 4 applications of emptiness, we're understanding, for example, first, form is emptiness. We're dispelling the first extreme, the first conceptual imputation, which is our assumption that things exist according to how they appear, that they exist. But when we investigate using ultimate reasoning, we see that they cannot fall into that extreme of inherent, truly existent nature. So we dispel that first extreme of existence. And so we're going through a process. But that doesn't mean that it's non-existent in the absolute sense either. It still appears. And we're not denying that. So when we first start investigating, we're looking at the appearance, and we see that it lacks sort of an inherent truth or existence, using reasoning such as not being singular or multiple, using reasoning of examining its parts and their parts and so forth. And we see that there isn't actually a flower or an object that exists there from that ultimate reasoning. But it doesn't mean that we're denying the appearance of the flower, and the flower is now like literally non-existent, like you take a flower and then you burn it and now you say there's no existence of a flower. There's no flower. Right now, while we're looking at that flower, we don't have to do anything to the flower. And its nature is still empty by nature when we investigate using ultimate reasoning. And that's what
Teni
this
na nga tsu
wisdom
tangbo
is
mai pa mai
pointing out to us.
tangbo tongnin mai khanji tongnin la bzu ba.
So if it was like the meba.
Yeah, me pa chi.
If now we're denying it, then it was like it existed before, and now we investigate, and now it doesn't exist. And then we're just fabricating.
Nga tsu bzu so
Mental
tangbo yo
fabrication.
pa chi tangbo me
First,
par bzu so na
it
wa wa.
exists, and then it didn't
Tendigo mare.
exist. And that doesn't hold water.
So you will know that meaning. Don't worry. Teni zuk tong ba oze o tere teni ta korang teni res. Ta ni pa tere. Tong ba ni zuk so song jagre ta. Okay, teni ta tong ba ni zuk so ze. Ni pa te lep so. Tong ni jib jur kana ni. Ni pa tong ba ni zuk so ze na. Ta matrup yin to nang yo re ji pi ton de. Ta tong ba ni zuk so ze na. Tong ba ni di yin yin to Denver matrup yin to ze gore. Ton tambalap dent matrup yin to kunzup tarnyet gema tawo. Malam tawo nang yo re. Nang wi chalak so samlo tang gore. Nga chu ngola mik zung tong na wi datu wa te. Oh, zuk tong bao ji pi kavla ngoni zuk ram yin tong ba ni renduk. Yin na tong ba ni yin yin to flower tong ni dim yin to nang yo re. Korang matrup yin to nang yo re ji pi ton tere. Konye ngarwa yo mar. Nga chu shir tang samlo tang la ngarwa rwa. 코랑 맨입 zonte 요칸인 그 말을. 요입 zonte 메칸인 그 말와. 뭐보직. 덥실당 강이 가상 캐나 졸라 라빈. 지가 메피 메파레테. 강 메피 메파레. 데니라고 말해서 결인데. 롱고거라 목심 기부 가상이 랍송아 캐나 졸라 회축작송아. 데라고 있나 데니 요 말에 옛날 다 매드진 도롱오라 하는 거래. 목심 그fu 매진 또 목심 말에 때 목심 라베요 말다. 롱 그 말. 루르버 그fu 매진 또 루르버 포는 거래잖아 요 말. 가래지나 대따뜻이나 찹빈 탈라 홍도 거래. 공도 나와 그 나와때 동반이 딤비셔나네 요밥 덴트금 다 랄홍요 맛 세르소. ngazu gimbar gu dentub zongore ngazu takchig lag ni ore ba gimbar to ser songore ezer I'm so sorry izegi ore teni tomba nit zukso jipati ona me pa metang ere zena mare ezeki ore kwena to zere ta kwena metongde tena ona me pa metang re zebjana digre zena mare ezeki ore gang me pa ere zena tena na wakta ni me pi me pa chi ere zena mare zena 코랑 그 람신 동이 인유진도 능요레스 디 가레 세르케레 제나 메핌 타세르키오레 람신기 마트비진도 능와당 공연가로요 말에 코랑 뜨리레 다 회나 멜로낭 또 죽년 나위 니kam나 죽 동바오지 피카라 멜로낭 그 죽대 회나 가추 멜로낭 라 따나 가추 무마르와 죽 무요 마르와 티나라 죽 무이키 똥오레 죽 무요 마레세 그래 나와 다동 요 나야 죽 무요 마레 죽 동바오 지피카라 테타오레 멜로낭 그 죽 능라 마트파다오레 동아니 죽소 지피카라 멜로낭 그 죽년 마트비진 또 죽년 같이 고요레 땡가로요 마레 마트비진 또능 초코도가 멜로낭 죽년 타오레 ngama nga chu mopam rom chi san mer zo pi ol ze ti nang ing kyang so la ji ba phya yin kyang so mang che u ha ko yo de yang ni yang to hob jong che gu shi na di ko wa de ko do ga sat pi na wa ta mlam ka na ni ka ma ta pa yin lung da du ze ni rik pi go ni sha pa ta ni ko ni zo pa gyam ni tan la wa bi wa o te nam jin te ni ze gu zuk to tong ba ni zuk so ze 람진 기 마트 파르만 타보레스 마트 진토 말람 그나와 카르초코레 니 니모 남진 카르도 그도와 말람 아나 마나도 카르도와 찍바 찍장다 마트 진토 카르초코도가 어디 망라 동안에도 죽소 지비던데
Mipam Rinpoche Lu Giming Karde again, one more time.
가리서 근세는
I
trang
don't.
만들고
Ngan sawa ni ni didn't double information zone can mend it.
Oh my gosh I don't remember
Does anyone remember the name of that song by Mipam Rinpoche where dream and waking and dream got in a debate? What is the name of that text?
debate about
Okay. Will you? Thank you. How convenient.
yeah 잠깐만 you
So, so first we establish that form is empty, that it cannot be established to exist. But then we establish that emptiness is form. So now we're at the second application of emptiness. So that even while we cannot establish that it ultimately exists, it still appears. And so while it is empty, while it lacks inherent existence or truth, it's still appearing like a dream, like an illusion. We see forms, we hear sounds. And so while it is empty, it is appearing. While it can't be established as ultimately existing, it is appearing. There's no contradiction. We think there's a contradiction. We think for it to not, so basically this one is saying it's not non-existent. So for it to not be non-existent, like we think then it means it can't, let me see, not be non-existent. Oh boy. We think that if it doesn't exist, it has to completely not exist. Like it can't appear, it can't manifest. There has to be nothing whatsoever. If
void,
existence
a
can't be
void.
established, if it doesn't exist, then it has to be non-existent. Then it has to be nothing whatsoever. Kind of like the examples I gave yesterday, it has to be nothing like a non-existent thing, like, for example, the horns on a rabbit or the hair of a turtle. It has to be a complete non-existence, which is the view of a discontinuity or of nihilism, of nothingness, nothing whatsoever. But that isn't the case. Because even while everything, all appearances are empty by nature, cannot be established to exist in the first place, at the same time, they're still appearing and being experienced in the second place. So we tend to fall into the extremes. And then we think, for example, that things, because they appear and we experience them as they do, they exist according to our conception of them, our concepts of them, that they're that. And they aren't. We've already disproved that. Rinpoche said, I'm so sorry. But then we want to go to the other extreme and say, well, then they must be non-existent, like nothing whatsoever, like a total non-existence. But they aren't non-existing either. So while they cannot be established to exist, they're still appearing. And there's no contradiction between their appearance and our experience of them and the fact that they are not established to exist. So we're not now proving non-existence either as a second extreme. And the examples which illustrate this are, for example, when we see ourselves reflected on the surface of a mirror, we know our body doesn't exist in the mirror. That it's just dependent upon those sets of causes and conditions, it's appearing there, but we know that it doesn't exist there, and yet it's perfectly fine for us that it appears. We're okay with that. So this is the same thing. That it can't be established to exist by its nature doesn't then mean it can't appear and it ultimately is non-existent either. Just like the appearances that arise, on a mirror, we are fine with them appearing even though there isn't a form existing there. And the same thing, for example, we explored this in a text I recently taught, An Illusory Symphony, a song of debate between waking and dream states by Mipam Rinpoche, which some of you may recall. And so, for example, dream appearances, during the dream, we experience all of those appearances. They don't exist anywhere. They aren't established as inherently truly existing, and that it's perfectly fine that they appear. Our waking state is no more real than that. So just as dream appearances are not real, do not exist, but appear, so too during our waking states, exactly in the same exact way, they lack an established inherent truth, and yet they do appear. And so like dreams, like illusions. And so then we have emptiness is form. So?
동반이 숙소스. 대니 선바데 우죽리 경 동반이 얀마인. 다 되니 zugli kyang tongpa ni jen main tongpa ni li kyang zug jen main jipati kare tong yore zena ta zongjuk re zek yore zongjuk re zek yore ti mangla tip tip shena zugli jen te kirpi zug tongpa ni ze chi yore zena yo mare zug korang li jen te kirpi teli tata te kirpi zug ki tongpa ni yore zena yo mare togna zug korang don da bala zug ki tongpa ni te chik dawo chak da gore zug li kyang tongpa kaka chik yo mare tongpa ni li kyang zug jen mai no zena zug ki tongpa ni tongni di yor wa nga di tongni te tongpa ni li kyang dak zug kaka chik yo re zena yo mare di kare tong yo re zena zong juk yin par ton de te na me tok ramjin ki mat pa te tang me tok ko na wan de ni ka te yo pa den chup kum thasero re teni me pa chapin thasero re debshin to ti nawa tang tongpa ni ka zongjuk re jipi ton te ta zongjuk zena kare re zena nga tsu khwer na zongjuk zaya te chi nang to omam luk tangpa nang vjin ka zongjuk zege yo mare pata na nga tsu tatan tong yo mare chi tam chit oman rawo gyur du yo re di na nang la chi dantan kaka yo re omi dantan kaka yo re wa yang na zongjuk zaya te thakpa karo tang marpo ni myam to drum tangwa nang vjin chik yo re zena zongjuk tandi chik zege yo re zena yo mare tandi mare zukki tongpa ni korang tani zuk yinpa zuk korang tongni dimpa chik dego go yo re o tandi res
Emptiness is not other than form. And so, as we kind of continue to press into this matter, then what this is indicating to us is that form and emptiness are indivisible. Another translation for that same term would be a primordial unity. What that means is that there is not an emptiness that is other than the form. Like you have the form, and then you have some other separate identity that is now emptiness. It means if you've realized emptiness, the form itself is the emptiness. They're indivisible, they're the same thing. There isn't an emptiness that is separate from the form, that is other than it, that is something else. And furthermore, form is not other than emptiness. This is the fourth. So then there isn't a form that is other than the emptiness. Again, indicating their indivisible nature. So it's not like you have, when you look at a flower, there's the nature of the flower cannot be established to exist at the same time the flower is appearing. So we dispute the possibility of an ultimate existence, that it, as an established inherent truth, is existing. And at the same time, then that it is non-existing in an absolute way, like a discontinuity or a nihilistic view of total non-existence either. So while it is empty, it is appearing. They're one and the same. To speak about appearances is the same as speaking about emptiness, and vice versa. They're a unity. And this isn't like we're mixing two different things together so that you can't tell the difference, like where you mix, for example, if you were to pour milk into water. It looks like they're fully mixed, but actually there are particles that are milk and there are particles that are water, so they're not technically fully mixed. Here, and it's also not like joining two separate things, like where you join a black rope and a white rope and then you twist them until they're entirely sort of intertwined. Here, a primordial unity, or that they're indivisible, means that there's not two different things, that the emptiness is not something that is other than the form, and the form is not something that is other than the emptiness. They're indivisible, one and the same. And that's what we understand from these two final statements in the four applications of emptiness. What's
Tere, te na dina tong jibjur zete ta kyang zu ore, teni tarong khwe chik jak ma swa. Zongjuk la yang dawi khwe chik pu tok ni jak tab khayore. Di zongjuk te an khwe na korang dawi na mare, teni karsa, teni di melon na ka zungyen te la samlo tang na yang, melon na ka zungyen te yang korang zuk matapi cha te li jan mare. Melon na ka zungyen te zuk matapi cha li jan te kyurpi, melon na ka zungyen ka nawa yang yo mare. korang chik pare. Ten pe kowa long kondo wa ti tokni. Kok chik re. Te yin na karze ko na zungyen korang matapi, korang zuk trup yo mare. Dor na zungyen korang zuk mare. Zuk trup yo mare te, won tang tani melon na ka zungyen ka nawa tsam yo chokre. Nang jen to matrup yo re, matrup jen to nang yo re. Ta ze na zung juk re ma tong ma ti nang ni yo mare. O ti ma la kogu yo re ze re.
So another example to illustrate what we say when we say primordial unity or indivisible would be, again, going back to this example we have of the reflection of a form on the mirror. And so we have a form that's reflected on the surface of the mirror, and that doesn't mean that the form is actually physically there, like the body hasn't gone into the mirror, it's not there. But even as it can't be established to exist there, then it's still appearing. The reflection is still appearing. The reflection is not other than, so it, with some words. So while the reflection cannot be established to exist, it's still appearing, and the appearance is not something other than the non-existence of a form there, and the non-existence of it there is not something other than the appearance. I don't think I got that well. But anyways, the reflection is a great example of how you have something, the form cannot be established to exist, and yet it still appears, and the appearance and its non-existence are the same thing at the same time. The fact that it's a reflection and that it appears are one and the same. So they're not two separate things. Awesome.
O tere tip sherna dawi zungyen chik goni samlo tangna yagi zuk tomba o jipi khwe yang ten rogo yore. Tomba ni zuk so jipi khwe yang ten rogo yore. Teni tomba ni zuk li kyang tomba ni jan mayin khwe yang ten rogo yore. Teni tomba ni li kyang zuk jan mayin o jipi khwe yang ten rogo yore. Teni di tonyu jibjor te re ni kyang teni te tar ten rogo yore. Ti melon zungyen ka kerang tu kale tata ti thoni ko ajemo ragong ya yore o te res
Dazuki da melong chikwa.
yes
Kerang chikwa songdewa.
yeah
So the reflection on the mirror, or for example, reflection on the moon on water, works with each of these four applications of emptiness. Form is empty. There isn't actually a moon there in the reflection. Emptiness is form. still appears. Emptiness is not other than form, and form is not other than emptiness. If you apply these fourfold lines of reasoning to the example, it also works. That's all. So all four applications of emptiness can be applied to a reflection, and we can understand it in the same exact way.
대비신도 તની તાંગી કારસે કે યનજેનાને કેરાં તોલા 다 디고니 똥니 집지어디 디 오글란드와 죽당 저러왔던 득히던 득실라속바 대비신도 때님도나 코르왔던 명을는 디비 축강당 강인장다 너 탐치 때라는 디 똥니 집지어디 로르땅 때가 닐루 그릭파티 캡요리 차상라 디고니 때니 다 추탐시 따와 똥니 딤바데 단라와 제나 텐디치글라 제켜 nga 셈땅치 바 찍바레 다 땡아 추더니 똥니 단라와 버세 똥니 그 따와 단라와 송제 다 오나 당아 추델랍 때니 히럽든 차르고요로와 티 따와 때 요고요레 가추 오케이 김선지고니 걔랑 하고레 당아추 드는데 냠는 셰피르니 갑텔라 레리리리 곰나 드크요레 타오 나위 냠는 마레 마르타 나메크 냠는 죽동바오 지파텔라 나메크 남주르제레 광나망라 나메크 남주르치 텔라 테니 tampo khwerna nga chu tedipshini gum gu khyor khwerna longo la zuk gang rongwa chi shom la kharni yeb tang Katog gang rongwa chi yong kan chi sem la kharni te teni tongni dim ba te rikpa tang hoi goni hakoni te tongba imbar matap pa imba rangsin ki matap pa imba 냠숨 용국이요. 능이 공투 샤스와 캐런서 뉴와 비르든지 히럽지 고레스. 뉴와 비르든지 따와 고레스. 대자테 때리레. 대타도 로고고요. 당모 대타도 곰나 간삼 지글라 무니 죽동바오 제이트 냠뇽도 아주 냠숨 용 덮고요. 히럽크. 더곰. 디지텔라 동바니 죽소 지바타 능치그 냠는 제레텔라. 더니 다 동바니 이름진도 느리시니 능해요레 제니 양더니 릭바다 회이고니 나서르테 하고니 텔라 냠숨 용해요레. 덤용화가 니빠테레.
디크브 딱싱 체결을 요 말에 just 샘나샤 똥니
테 릭바다 회그 보니 라비니.
so 셰곰레
테타도 시니 더니 가추 냠서 용해요레. 지샤니 명이바 계속나 띵응 ዠ고요레. 너나 데니 디망라 나메크 남주르 남치크 냠는 제키요레. 더나와 카르트 죽니 ramshin ki matu vision to kharvi chala ngi pakeni tingong lab yekhore tab gum japene kangi tep shakhore da kyang thola teni sambate zongjuk namjur jipate tere zongjuk namjur ta kawa lebdo kre jina kansam chila teni no vision to tongla tong vision to nawa yimbi zongjuk 냠닛 임바 스투터 임바 가수 티말라 스투터 냠바 쳔보 제기오레 티칼란 능위 동위 쇼스 조보 홍요 말에 nang yu shok so so to nang yo mare yena rob nyam bi rang jin chen tu ba tham che tang trar so yi tendi chi ga la lep do re kan sam chi la de la zong ju ko nam yor ze khyo re nyongam sanyi du jirdan de da te nyongam sanyi jirdan se re ti ma la ti khirap te ti tawa te tendi res ta ko ndu ge chu
Mm,
mi sam na chok ngong gi mi pa chi ra man duk sam ga
well, person ke churchill song in a yut met nika me the kerang tripa dan jawa ngan zo kawayo mare. So kande chi konzo dinge banana juk do me
te
the
te re
same
chu ma ko wi ta te re
So these are what are called the 4 applications of emptiness. And when we investigate all phenomena, all forms, which is all apparent objects, then whatever they are, we can go through this process in which we use logic and reasoning, beginning with form is empty, to establish that it doesn't ultimately exist, and go through that fourfold process with each thing to determine its ultimate nature is emptiness. And then we can go through that same process in the same way with each of the other aggregates, which are the aggregates that constitute the mind. And so essentially, we use various lines of reasoning to determine that forms are emptiness, and then go through this process, this fourfold lines of reasoning to understand that emptiness. And then in terms of a practice, there are 4 different practices which are so-called based on each of these four applications of emptiness. So the first meditation is called meditating on appearances not existing. So form is empty. And so that's called the yoga of appearances not existing. And so then you use all the lines of reasoning to see how any object does not have existence. It's examining in the same ways that we just went through, using those lines of reasoning, looking at, thinking about its shape, its color, and so forth, using logic and examples to determine that it is empty of existing, that it cannot be established to exist. It's empty by its very nature. And then when you have that determination, you have that insight, then you allow your mind to rest in the experience of that insight, in the experiential insight of that. That's the wisdom, the experiential wisdom. We spoke about earlier, Rinpoche said, I mentioned how we have the 4 branches of experience. So this is the first, experiential wisdom, in which we determine that forms are empty. And then we want to experience that by resting our mind in the immersion of whenever we have that certainty or knowing of that, and we rest in that. And eventually we have a direct experience of forms being empty. And then the next meditation, emptiness is form, is called the practicing with appearances. So now we've determined everything to be emptiness, so we have that clear insight through reasoning and logic that it's empty, and we're resting in that everything is emptiness, and we understand at the same time that it appears, that there are appearances that arise, and we rest in the experience of that. So we have an analytical or contemplative aspect of the meditation, and then when there's certainty, then we're resting in that. And so this is called the practice with appearances. But
experience of emptiness of appearances.
Yes. Yeah, but you didn't say that. You didn't say tong di nawa tongwa ki nyam yong. You said nawa dang chebe nyamlan. So the name nawa dang chebe nyamlan chikor yourself. So in the second one, it begins with emptiness, that recognition of emptiness, and then we understand that it appears, that while there is nothing that is established by its very nature, appearances arise. And so together with appearances, and we have the experience of emptiness with appearances. And then the third meditation, emptiness is not other than form, then is the yoga of the unity of emptiness and form. And so we recognize then here it's looking at the primordial unity or the indivisible nature of appearances and emptiness, their equal nature. That equalness that is a complete freedom from all conceptual imputations. So this is dissimilar from the first two levels. It's more profound. Because first we were focusing on appearances and how they were empty, and then we were focusing on emptiness and how appearances still occurred, and now then it's a complete freedom from all conceptual elaborations in which there isn't an emphasis on either form or emptiness, but the unity. Free from all conceptual extremes. It doesn't mean the mind is blank and it's just not thinking. It's not like a blank state of mind and we think that's what emptiness means, is we're not having concepts. We're recognizing how everything is empty and thereby does not exist according to any conceptual concepts.
What is English in calm?
Calm, like blank state. There you go. That's
what you blank state?
Blank state.
Yeah,
where you're not having any thought. Not having any thought is not non-conceptual. It's just blank mind, like what they call pashang view. So, an actual freedom from conceptual elaborations, experiencing equal nature is a completely different scenario. And that's what it means when we say primordial unity. She said right now, don't worry. Like right now, just to conceive of it, it seems like, whoa.
We have no patience.
So we expect that we should understand this right now.
We're always looking for fast food. Called the fast food and the shortcut. Everything. But some things you cannot go there. But depends on your faculty, individual. Maybe some students don't need to go these stages. Okay? First, the form is empty. That part you examine and then you practice there. You just, for long as you can. Many days, weeks you can do. You stay there, practice. And then second stage, emptiness form. Or you first, maybe when you hear this emptiness, you already have this wisdom. You have experienced everything, anything as emptiness. That's wonderful. But that's depending on you. That is not a rule. But it's depend on you. What kind of practitioner you are.
So it's not a rule that you go through this sequence of stages. Nyamnyong jipa ke song yomarwa. Nyamnyong jipa.
Jipa che yomar.
Ke nyong jiden. This so summa tokmende.
No, zongjuk kanala.
Zongjuk is Nietzsche.
Te mare nyamlen uje ke yomare.
So zongjuk is both.
Nyamlen nyuab jir den zeke kyutta zeke ndowe. Te zena tim jigma timala. So
Nietzsche nyamto kun.
Oh yes. Konye te ma zongjuk tela. Zongjuk kanala ni kan do orba jimanika.
So the meditation that is endowed with fourfold experience is just 3 meditations. So the first one is where
냠-
appearances don't
남줄
exist.
씀.
The second one was with emptiness with appearances. And then the unity, the indivisible nature of those is the second two lines. Emptiness is not other than form, and form is not other than emptiness. So they're both included under the unity, just for clarification.
가르지나 큐 히럽 그 냠링 그 나라. 때니 니 위트 요구 요래.
But the reason why we talk about
때니 위 코랑 가르지나 큐티 갈랍 그래. 때니 동니 위트 창국 요래 봐. 옛날 냠는 씀 그 나라 창국 요래.
The reason why we talk about fourfold,
냠
endowed with fourfold experience when we speak of the practice of prajna, profound wisdom, is because each of the four applications of emptiness need to be present in it. But when we talk about it from the experiential level of the meditation, we talk about three meditations because the last two lines are the same. They're the unity, that primordial unity or indivisible
교
nature.
zon주글라 렙나 교디
Once you
냠용
arrive
요래.
at their
동반이 우글리 젠 마인
at the
파타.
experience of their unity, then you have the direct experience of both emptiness not being other than form and form not being other than emptiness. You're experiencing that simultaneously. You're having the direct experience of that. That's all.
So this emptiness is a very, very, this way, the most the simplest way, actually, this. And then also when I'm using even Dharma terminology is very, very easiest ones. I'm using and a simple way. For example, if I teach this in Tibet, Shyata people, the monks, they always study people. Oh my gosh! Then you teaching these teachings is very details, very elaborate. So that way is a different way of teaching, but very, very important. I know America very well now. You practitioners today, there's so many people. I said this morning, you remember, if you don't understand emptiness of self-emptiness, you don't understand all phenomena, emptiness. Sometimes people don't want to study, practice this way. Just they say, okay, I'm going to practice Mahamudra and the Dzogchen practice. Wonderful, that's really good. But the Mahamudra, Dzogchen is wisdom, very profound wisdom. When you have that wisdom, it's definitely have to have training your mind. Then in that view, you have to have this self-emptiness and all phenomena emptinesses. If you have that experience, there, you are okay. Otherwise, you deceive yourself. It's really, that's truly, I'm just not saying you, I don't know, sometimes in Tibetan we call it sosu nawatak. I don't know how you translate that. There is a different ways.
We label our old experiences. Also, so
No, rana sosu yendokhago she.
Oh.
Yendokhago she kore. Dzogchen gwiu da Mahamudra.
Oh, you're just imagining.
What?
Imagining? No.
Yeah, you just doing imagining.
You're just imagining.
You have a Mahamudra view. You have Dzogchen view. But depend is you training your mind or not this way. Then you don't need to go to this way. This kind of practitioners, you don't need to go to what I taught today this way. This is the very, very, because this is the helps even Dzogchen view Mahamudra view. Because the Dzogchen view, Mahamudra view, is you have to have emptiness view. You have to have, we call the yeshi, here we call the wisdom. It's the same. In your yeshi view, do you have real emptiness there or not? If you see like things and you experience all things different than any other ones, ordinary people, or still you have grasping very strong same as before. Before you never ever any practice Mahamudra and Dzogchen. It's the same as that. That doesn't work. That means then you are imagination. Almost what you do in your Halloween.
Pretending to be something. Playing.
Something happy. Uh-huh. So therefore, Mepam Rinpoche, he said, do you remember I quote many times these, his words,
As in, comes from the beacon of certainty.
Katog darka chopala, tarngir tawan tarshin goes. Dorna tumbanyin tartuk mar, Dzogchen tawan tartuk patok por shepala, Tonyin tartuk pachik higukundu, zere tubsam jiguane. Titonde, Ruma higukundu zegiore.
So Mipam Rinpoche, in one of his most famous treatises, The Beacon of Certainty, he has this quote. He says, to arrive at the view of the pure view of original purity, one must have reached the perfection of the view of,
Madhyamaka.
It's Madhyamaka. There's a specific school in that one that he said. But anyhow, essentially, if we are looking at having that view of original purity, meaning of the great completion of the absolute nature of, according to Dzogchen, then included in that is having reached the full conclusion of the view of emptiness. Otherwise, we aren't there. And so he says we have to study and contemplate and meditate on the Madhyamaka view and have that fully incorporated for being able to refine the Dzogchen view of original purity.
So, 어떤 입신이 용구요래.
So it's like that.
디 말았더니 우죽라네. 똥이 비비르기를 박죽직부 독도 배쳤다니 아주 대랑 샤야데 텐디피 샤송. 더니 때 냠는 게 차니 남적 섬당샤니 샤데.
So then we used the aggregate of form as the example to go through the fourfold application of emptiness, these 4 lines of emptiness. And then we spoke about the meditation, which is a 3-fold practice on that.
Uh-huh. Okay, now tangi kerang tola karelap ke yenzena. Oh wow. Tangi kerang tola karelap ke yenzena. Dere, yakpo chiglaba. Nguni shana kerang tu hihiyo nandi tonyu yibjur ke rigpate. Ngatu lobjong tonden binala. Rempa chikshad yore. Te namshin rona pe yakpo yore. Kerang tu. Di namjur somde. Tonyu yibjur tang namjur som ke nyamnen tang jar ni lobjong tonden binala. Kari songore na churna malam tawar sam se. Nguni shana ngatu shat sar song angaman. Gona tela yore. Churna malam tawar sam zipate zuk tongbao zipa namjin de chu tamchit ramjin ki matu par malam tawar sam gos. Zuk tongbao tongwa ni zuk so zuk yang tongwa ni yang zuk jen mai no zipi namjin de zek yore. Churna malam tawar sam zeb yore. Chik. Taramba tangpo tere.
Okay.
Teni marki rik pixi lakshat songore. Ta tangwo yurla karlap gore. Teni yurla 남저 섬 땅 자르니 냠는 핏 데레 추르나 말람 타वर 삼시 바데 아니 바데 유르첸 그셈 마르티리 피시 락샤트 세켜 경주 장근도가 유르첸 데니바 데니 니바데 마르티리 피시 락샤트 당아춘디 동유비비르 기릭 바탕 자르나 데 셈양 데리레 when chola control chi kena jingna chi kena semche chi langna zuk tongba o yi pa te tangbo teni kerang ke jingna ke sem de tongba ni yin je de jingna ke sem de kar ko ti na cha tongba ni li jingna jan mai jingna li tongba ni jan mai no tong ni yib jor te tela nang me ke nyam nam jor tang nam chi ki nyam no to zong juk ko nam jor ro to ko yor ti ma la ma ki ri pi si la sha song 하고 소하다 동료 비브줄 기릭 바탕 샤크 추강 있나 데스타르도 저 초코요레 디르과데 어떤 일이스
So these four applications of emptiness then can also correspond or correlate to the practices in the ultimate bodhicitta section of the 7 key points of mind training, which many of you may recall. And so the 4 applications of emptiness and then the 3 practices that we just spoke about of how to practice those 4 applications. So in the first statement for absolute bodhicitta in the 7 key points of mind training, it says, see all phenomena to be like dreams. And so then the objective phenomena, all forms, essentially the aggregate of forms, then to see them to be like dreams is the same process. If we understand these the 4 applications of emptiness, we see that they are like dreams. And so form or emptiness, and so on and so forth. We go through these 4 applications. That they aren't just as dream appearances are not established to exist by their very nature, and we experience them, then we can see how then the nature of phenomena is the same, and apply the 4 applications of emptiness, and then go through the 3 stages of the meditation that I spoke about. And that would correspond to the statement in the 7 key points of mind training, see all phenomena as dreams. Then the second statement in the key points of mind training says, examine the fundamental, fundamental, you're looking at mind. Anyways, do you all know the text? And so we're looking at the fundamental nature of awareness to be unborn, the unborn nature of mind. And then this is the same thing, but instead of examining the objects through the 4 applications of emptiness and the 3 stages of practice, now we're looking at the perceiver of those objects. And so then examining the fundamental unborn nature of awareness is the perceiver of those objects. And again, we can go through the 4 applications of emptiness to our mind on any level. Whatever thought or mental state is arising, we can apply that investigation. So if we're experiencing, for example, mental afflictions like anger or fear or worry and so forth, let's take the example of fear. So we're experiencing fear, and so then the first step is we see how fear is empty. And then emptiness is fear. Emptiness is not other than fear, and fear is not other than emptiness. And we go through that gradual process of applying understanding through reasoning to each, and then we meditate on it, the non-existence of appearances. We do the practice with appearances, and then we do the unity, the 3 practices of emptiness. And in this way, then we examine the unborn fundamental nature of awareness of the mind. And that's the perceiver. And so that's the second of the ultimate bodhicitta key points there in the mind training, and we can apply the 4 applications of emptiness and the 3 stages of the experience of meditation on that. So?
You guys very funny. So now, 다동 도브종 돈들미나라 딱지기요래. 님보니 짱랑 사ტრulse. 거긴도가 님보니 짱랑 사트룰세 지기요래. 대가리레 제나네 당아주 유르 주는 말람 따우섬 유르라양 똥nhập 집주어 땅 자르니 히럽 그거니 냠는 시송 유르전게 셈라양 삼삼라 똥nhập 집주어 땅 자르니 히럽 그거니 냠는 시니 냠용 깨기요래. 다가리 사고레 제나네 삼삼라 히럽 코랑라요. 님보 들어봐. 똥이 똑비 히럽 코랑 가리. 대형 로이 히럽으로와. 디 히럽 코랑 라양네. 되니 히럽 코랑 똥이 유줄 거람 진짜 임바. 되님 산이 유든 그 똥이 임바. 하고니 딩앙라. 되니 남의 그 남저다 남치 그 냠저 종죽 그 남저 신인도나 배약 보요레 트리오가스.
So then the mind training takes it another step further. The third point under absolute bodhicitta there is that even the remedy resolves in its own ground or is liberated in its own ground. So first, we apply the understanding to objects. We establish that objects are empty through the 4 applications of emptiness. And then we have the wisdom that sees the empty nature of objects, and we practice that. Then we practice looking at the nature of the perceiver of objects, the mind, and we establish through the 4 branches, 4 applications of emptiness that mind also is empty, and we generate through the practice of that, we generate the wisdom that sees the mind to be empty. But what about wisdom itself? This is the remedy. The remedy itself is the wisdom then. And wisdom is what is the mental state of recognizing or knowing emptiness. It is a state of mind. So now, on occasion, then we also don't want to solidify wisdom. The wisdom that realizes emptiness itself also is empty. And so then you take that wisdom, which is what we call the remedy, and you apply the 4 applications of emptiness and the 3 practices, the 3 yogas of those those of the emptiness of appearances, with appearances, and then the unity of those. So?
하고송아.
Do you understand?
당아조 깔마 가기도 되니 저와직.
We have a
Tita.
couple minutes, so if there's anyone who has a question.
Yeah.
I'm repeating it, not to be rude, but for the people on the computer. Is emptiness then the ultimate reality is the question that was asked. So tuntambenelek dongnit.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I don't
why
need
you
to
looking?
translate that.
Yeah, I thought my answer is not right. Yeah. Yes. That's the really wisdom. Wisdom, when you knowing that, you realize that, then you have fully wisdom, the real wisdom. Parshan paramita.
The prajna paramita.
Mm-hmm.
The wisdom that takes us to the other side.
All the Buddha's mother and Bodhisattva's mother and Arhat's mother. Then that is. Not, yeah.
So the question was, I have to remember to repeat it in English. If one has that wisdom, what are the qualities in their mind?
Oh my gosh. Okay. Teni shirtang ko ognim yung gre. Korang magi la toni ko yuntan siya sa yore. Teni siya nan digre tab shirtang ko yuntan jamba shamba tang nyangje tamchit tis tsarli yung gore. Yang tak pi tawa yinna hirap tis tsarli yuntan kwena zopa yinna ra. Tangenzen yinna yung ra. Teni jirni teni shamba tang nyangje 파르도 심바 뚝 냠는 영 딱바직 용사대 데니 용크요래 디 델랍테니 디 연단 문입샤낭이 저 똑똑 집샤나 the mother of transcendence or Buddha's 람도가 성기 탐시 테니 용래 등이 제모인다 담타스 비디오 때레 옛나요 다 지마 용거래 때서
So
디 용코라나 용거래
one thing Rinpoche said is later in the text it talks about the qualities that come from emptiness. It sort of describes those. But in general, all the positive qualities in our mind will come when we have that recognition of emptiness. Loving kindness and compassion are sourced in that wisdom. When we have that authentic view or that wisdom, its natural kind of response is of greater compassion and love. And that's why we say wisdom, emptiness's essence is compassion. Because when we have the wisdom that is recognizing it, that realizes it, then naturally we're more compassionate and more tolerant. And naturally, then we would also have the greater capacity to experience meditative absorption and shamatha, and obviously love, compassion, the 6 paramitas. Essentially, if we have the authentic view, if we truly are generating wisdom, the profound, that insight into the nature, and it's really true wisdom, then all the other qualities are also growing and are also coming from that. And Rinpoche said, if I tease you, then again the answer in even more of a nutshell is, it is the mother of all Buddhas, which is to say that is the source of the ultimate fruition and all the qualities that come from that.
If there is no this mother, without this mother, we cannot attain the Buddhahood at all. Whatever you do. The other practices may be many years, it doesn't matter. You will have very good life all the time. Many lifetimes you have wonderful life. You have virtuous. You are always maybe doesn't have so much sufferings, but you cannot really liberate from samsara without this wisdom. So tani tanga so parche juk songre ta yenna yang ngi kerang so la labya te. Di nang la nang me nyam nen te tampo gom na li la bo re korang. Tak chik pu gom. Tani nang chi nyam nen te gom. Tani zong juk nyam nen te gom ni. Kale ndo na pe yak po yo re.
Tun chik or ke tun
No. Te tong chik nang do gom mare.
Asa.
Ten tong kakap shi na yak po yo re.
Asa.
Ta yenna ngi kale shi ni fully practice ngi jimi weekend na lab yung ke. Tatong te lang go kare go kyo ngurji kare mjuk kare yore. Jimangi teni jimangi kerang tola tanga tu jimani teni ndi ogni man ro kare pe mate pe yakpo mapo shaya yore. Jimangi repeat mapo shekmen terang di nang la mapo yore parche tanga to masamja tang ap chituk chilep tarsong nga chonde yo patang nyam to zegyo. Teni te chachang ngi dandap shat yo pate kerang tu lhob yung yakpo chi tela goa yakpo chi ragna teni jima ngi shat pirni ka pe pantok yore di ogma ten robi kabla di kabla ngi shat tang titi manrawap shi ni shat kyo kerang tu hako gore 가래 지나기 타르톡 비샤탕 때 시니 망가 걸룩 비샤탕 때 시에 경이 비샤탕 그 제로 비샤탕 지 요래 똥니 어추 걔랑 그 띵어람 냠적 신도 난 디그레 everything is tuba tham che tang tar 띵어람 마주 버 조조 자다 워치 샤 데디시니 로 맹아 다리 말아 점천 지요 이 가래 지나 지마 네 tani maung pa na di zhong te transcribe xie sang books of sam kyo dari ki chute di xue na ngi gang tap xi ni gang yik da wo ji xia ke yo se ko song a
So then the first meditation on how appearances don't exist, then that one is the easiest of all of them. When using the lines of reasoning and determining and meditating on that. And then the second of the emptiness together with appearances. And then the third is the unity of those. And so Rinpoche said we can practice those like one at a time. It doesn't have to be all in one session. And we might sort of really cultivate a confidence in the first one and then eventually move on to the second one and then on to the third one. We want to be, like right now, we might not have much of an idea what unity, the experience of unity would mean. But if we take our time and we actually experience each of these and we progress slowly so that there's real experience of the first one, and then there's real experience of the second one, and then when we get to the third one there's an actual experience of it, then you'll know what it means. You don't know what it means because you haven't experienced it. And so it can go slowly, like gradually. And then on the next weekend that we do the teachings, I believe the final weekend of August, then I'll teach more of the full practice process and sequence. But what I won't do is repeat anything that was said this weekend so that we can move forward with more information. And there's a lot more in this text to go through. And so then we won't repeat. And so that's why we have full attendance request. And then for you in this time to study these teachings so that you really feel like you have a confident understanding of them by the time we get to the next one will be really helpful. Because if you have that understanding and then we are going through these other perspectives and angles and so forth, then it's already based on confidence that you've generated by really working with and studying these teachings here. And so on this particular teaching of the Heart Sutra, this 2-weekend teaching that I'm kind of giving it in a different way than I usually do according to what's called the tradition of pith instruction approach. And I'm not just giving kind of a general teaching where I'm like, oh, just let your mind rest without concepts, and that's it, and you'll get it. I'm actually like going into this in kind of more detail and in a very specific way because it's my hope that I can transcribe and make a book out of these teachings, and so I'm teaching them exactly how I want to in the best way that I think they can be presented. So that's my purpose for the choice of how I'm giving this teaching here is very specific.
No, I know in America, transcribe making books. Now I got the power of my, power of mind. After that, really I know what to do, what look like it. In Tibet, we never had that kind of things. Yeah, but these days I think there are, but before we never had. So tani na wores.
So it's like that.
Tani ngala dino langi kerang to trawa chikyo. Ta jima ni nga ta tong ta nga ni kale shini ti chi ngi hwetet te so ya cheru ti chi ndo tab na ap sam khyo. Ngi maung pat hwetet thia te so. Te yen na tani ngi ta thok the public nang la viria ka hwetet chong chong mambo yore ngala. 다른 마음 방향 요트 그래. 대총이 editing 시니.
Are you talking about video or audio?
Yes, video 시작해 봐. 이거 고 말해. 대단하로 싫던.
대형 계란 주다 세ken 요거 근데요.
대단히 리라오래. 되니 대라 쪼 대가라. 더 editing 역보직 시행큰. 장마브조니 방아주 YouTube 당 들이는 라 역거나. video nangni tsangma chik zoom khanka computer ka goni tendi him khanka volunteer shen khanka kerang tso se nyam nyong yo na terang di nang la ngi kerang tso trabati yin koshi ngala labrok chi sho se.
So I have one question for kind of putting out there to everyone. And is that I would like some of the teachings that I give to have a greater reach, to be able to reach a greater audience. And so, for example, the teachings that I give in public, like on video, like such as these recorded video teachings, I would like to edit and then be able to make them available on YouTube and other platforms. And so, what I am looking for is someone who knows how to do edit on video, like video. I don't know, what do you call that? Video edit? Is that what that's called? Video editing. So if there's anyone in the audience watching, and if you have the skills to do video editing and would be willing to volunteer some
Ngala
time,
ngama mangbo yo re
then
bango pa yo
I have a
tekre zu
lot
tendi
from
bo
the past
wet
that
ngatu
have
ta war
not
tu
been.
shi
I
ma
have
so
many video recordings of teachings that have
ka
never
ki
been
shi so da
edited.
yin na
Some
editing
of
shi
them
men do
a little, and then some of them not. And so then I would like to be able to use that footage and to make it available and accessible to people. So if
tendi
anyone has that skill for
mangbo pan
video
to ya da wo sam lo
editing,
tang yo
please let me know. My intention, I feel like that could be of a great benefit to many people. So I'm just putting it out there, Rinpoche said, and asking the question. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Tanga zu
So now we'll do the dedication of merit.
Sonam daye tamche zikpani tomni nipi dhanan pamshini kega nanchi valon chupaye sebi toli duwa durwar cho kewa kundu yangta lama tan dharme chik warla longcho chong Satan lam ge yon tai rab zo ni do je jang ge gom ban nyur to jo in English.
Will someone give me the English version? I have to say it on the line and I don't have it. Sorry, thank you. I apologize. I only know these in Tibetan. Just as the heroic Manjushri achieved omniscience and like Samantabhadra to following in their footsteps, I completely dedicate this merit. Just as all the victorious Buddhas of the past, present, and future extol the sublime qualities of dedication, I too completely dedicate this root of virtue to all noble and virtuous conduct. Throughout all lifetimes, wherever I am born, may I attain the 7 qualities of the higher realms, and at birth may I meet with the Dharma and have the complete freedom to accomplish it accordingly. Furthermore, may I serve a qualified Lama and day and night be immersed in the Dharma. Realizing the teachings, may the heart essence meaning be accomplished, and in that very life may I cross over the ocean of conditioned existence. At that time, may I teach the sacred Dharma within conditioned existence and tirelessly accomplish benefit for others. May the great waves of impartial benefit to others bring everyone simultaneously to Buddhahood. Throughout my many lives until this moment, whatever virtue I have accomplished, including the merit generated by this practice and all that I will ever attain, this I offer for the welfare of sentient beings. May sickness, war, famine, and suffering be decreased for every being, while their wisdom and compassion increase in this and every future life. May I clearly perceive all experiences to be as insubstantial as the dream fabric of the night, and instantly awaken to perceive the purer wisdom display in the arising of every phenomenon.
Yeah.
May I quickly attain enlightenment in order to liberation of all sentient beings. Buddhas and Bodhisattvas altogether, whatever kind of motivation you have, whatever kind of beneficial action, whatever kind of wishing prayers, whatever kind of omniscience, whatever kind of life accomplishment, whatever kind of wishing prayers, whatever kind of omniscience, whatever immense wisdom you have, then similarly I, who have come in the same way to benefit beings, pray to attain these qualities. at this very moment for the peoples and the nations of the earth. May not even the names disease, famine, war, and suffering be heard. Rather, may their moral conduct, merit, wealth, and prosperity increase, and may supreme good fortune and well being always arise for them. Konri rawe korwe jingam su bendan dewa malu chungwe ni shinri ziwan denzen gyamzu yi shabe kargye bardu dengyur jing Konri trudu ngagyur nima ba kodo derje dengi gyatsab je Guru Beme Tukju Dulo Engi Tamba Zingyom Bue Wangchu Ba Nrudo Namka Gyatsen Rue Ko Kanye Lodrö T'haye Mingzimba Yenye Gutse Dambara Jene Ni Zamlin Sangyen Damba Gyatsen So Penden Jue Ni Jibu Damba Yonring Neba Dong Demba Zembe Jibu Nam Kutse Gyatsen Dengyer Shi Katog Baje Karpo Lando Drabatai Yahweh Jingkuen Yam Yam Dang Yalwa Kundan Yemeje Jenden Rashi Yurin Deng Yurchi.
Thank you. See you next time. Very beautiful informations down there. Yeah, that's very good. Thank you.
Okay, good night.
When I do this, everybody a little bit.
I'm not sure how much they heard. Rinpoche was trying to get the whole group's voice. Hear it, but who knows? Yeah.